Bonsoir à tous. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming this evening. Yes, this is an event about the World War, one of the World War I campaigns. I tried to think of this topic, this campaign, because it was a campaign outside the main European battlefields. So it took place in Western Turkey and Southeast Europe, but it involved French and Canadians. So there was an involvement by both France and Canada. So that I thought it would be that's one reason I thought it would be an interesting topic to discuss. But again, it's perhaps not as well known as some of the main events in Europe, in the Western and Eastern fronts. Yes, it's currently 6:35, and I'll try to keep it within an hour. So I'll actually speak. I'll try to speak for just 45 or 50 minutes, and then we can have a few minutes for questions and a discussion. Let's get started. So does anyone, can anyone think of which was the last province to join Canada out of the 10 Canadian provinces? Yes. Exactly. What year did they join Canada? Exactly. And so in fact, what's interesting is that the Canadian forces present at Gallipoli were all from Newfoundland, which at the time was of course not part of Canada. It was a separate British Dominion. So that's another interesting thing about this topic, this story. All right, so let's get started. Bit of background. What year did World War I start? Anybody remember?
1940.
And which event triggered the start of the war?
Yes, the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand.
Where was he?
Sarajevo.
Exactly. Very good. Yeah. So I see we have some historians. Yes, Franz Ferdinand was assassinated. Exactly. Now, when World War I, when it started, you had the two. You had the Western Front and the Eastern Front as the main fronts, with millions of soldiers fighting. So the two, which were the two alliance? Anybody can everybody remember the two alliance groups?
Central Powers.
Central Powers were who? Central Powers were
Germany and Turkey and Hungary, I think.
Germany, Turkey, and Austria-Hungary, and the other and yes, and then the other alliance system was France, Russia, and
Italy.
Yes, and
England.
correct, exactly. The so-called Triple Entente. That was the alliance. So it was the Triple Entente versus the Central Powers. Turkey actually eventually joined the Central Powers. So Turkey joined Germany and Austria-Hungary, fighting against Britain and France and Russia. So anyhow, this is just the agenda, the list of, and as you can see, I've tried to keep it as short as possible. There's five main points, and this is what I'll try to review today. This is even the Gallipoli campaign itself is obviously a huge topic on which books and books have been written on, and books continue to be written on. So there's a lot to cover. This evening, I'm just trying to offer a sort of a broad summary of some of the main events of that campaign, and I'd also like to share a little bit of my own personal impressions, personal thoughts about that campaign and its impact, its overall impact. That's a bit of just to quickly review the background of World War I. We talked about the two alliance systems, and in terms of the causes of World War I were diverse. We can't of course review them all here, but there's basically rivalries, political rivalries within Europe, imperialism outside of Europe, economic rivalry, naval rivalry between Germany and Britain. So there was a number of causes to the war. In terms of within Europe, yes, you had the main Western Front, where in eastern France and Belgium, where the Germans were fighting the French and the British, and then on the Western Front, and then on the Eastern Front, Austria-Hungary and Germany were fighting Russia. Within the first, at the beginning of World War I, in the West, the Germans had a very rapid advance, where they tried to advance on Paris, but they were stopped at the Battle of the Marne. What happened in the fall of 1914 is that the front line actually became stable. So you had you're all familiar with the trenches in World War I, where you had a relatively stable front line between the opposing armies. Now, I'll talk a little more about the Middle East in 1914. In the Middle East, you still had the Ottoman Empire, which still at that time ruled over what is today Turkey, but also many parts of what is today Syria, Palestine, Israel, and
Iraq.
Yes, Iraq, exactly right. So big chunks of the Middle East were under control of the Ottoman Empire, whose capital at the time was Istanbul. In the Eastern Front, so that Ottoman Empire, when the war started in early August of 1914, the Ottoman Empire was officially neutral. The Ottoman Empire in previous years had actually been, it had a difficult, or it had a tricky relationship with the great powers, because on one hand, some of the great powers wanted to increase their economic control over Ottoman territory, and at the same time, other great powers, for example, Russia. Russia always wanted to make sure that through Istanbul or Constantinople, that Russia would be able to export, or to use that sea lane to export to the outside world, sell exports. So Russia and Turkey in the 19th century, Russia and the Ottoman Empire in the 19th century had often had a very conflicting relationship. Now, Germany, for example, before the war started, Germany had been actually courting the Ottoman Empire and trying to extend its political and military influence in that area. Now, so that's essentially the situation. At the start of the war, again, the Ottoman Empire was officially neutral. However, within about a month or two of the war starting, the Ottoman Empire decided to join the Central Powers, decided to join Germany and Austria-Hungary. It did that for a variety of reasons, but partly because some of the leaders of the Ottoman government at that time had close ties to Germany and respected Germany's military power and felt that it would be that would be a better ally for them. Okay, so yes, this is a map of Europe at the time, and you can see in yellow the Central Powers: Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, Turkey, and you can see the Triple Entente, the Allied Powers, in blue. So that's essentially how Europe was divided at the time. Now, can everyone see can you see where Constantinople is?
Yes.
Okay, so that's, now can you see there's a little bit to the left and lower down, it says the Dardanelles. That's the strait through which this campaign will try to take place. So the Allied forces try to enter there and reach Constantinople. So you can see it's very narrow, right? And the small peninsula sticking out is the Gallipoli Peninsula. We can come back to the map if necessary later. Anyway, I thought I'd show some pictures of some of the leaders. Anybody recognize the guy on the left?
Atatürk.
Who was he?
Atatürk. He was the ruler.
Kemal Pasha was Turkish.
Was a Turkish prime minister or?
Well, yes, you're right. He became the leader of Turkey, the president of Turkey after the war. Now, during the war, he was actually one of the Turkish generals fighting in the battlefield of the campaign. Anyone recognize the guy in the middle? Yes, very good. Who was Kitchener?
He was a war minister at that time.
I'm sorry?
He was Minister of War.
Yes, exactly. Very good. Minister of War. He was at the time. He was almost a British national hero. He was so well respected, and he fought in South Africa, in the Sudan. He was Khartoum exactly, and he was Minister of War. So this is a very famous recruitment poster in Britain at the time. Your country wants you. Right? Actually, Britain in 1914, Britain did not yet have a compulsory military draft. It took 2 years. So for the first 2 years, Britain had to rely on volunteers for their army. So this is how they tried to recruit for the army. And on the right, Churchill at the time was he was what was called the First Lord of the Admiralty, which is like Navy Minister. And this Gallipoli campaign, Churchill was perhaps the main instigator, the originator of this idea. Maybe not the originator of the idea, but certainly the highest political authority that actually promoted and pushed this campaign forward. Now, as we shall see, this campaign almost destroyed Churchill's career. He made comebacks later, but the result of this Gallipoli campaign almost finished his political career. And until then, until 1914, he'd been a prodigy. He'd been minister in his early 30s. He'd been MP at 26. And he was 40 when the war started in 1914. So he was a rising star. Which political party did he belong to in Britain?
The Whigs, actually.
Exactly, the Liberals. He started as a conservative, but then switched sides to become a liberal. And then later on in his career in the 20s, he'll go back to being a conservative. But at the time, he was a liberal. So this is just a quick chronology of events, just to give you a snapshot of what are some of the what are some of the main events. The February 15, the first naval bombardment starts by Allied forces. Of course we don't. It's not necessary to remember all these dates, but basically it started in February 1915. So that's about 5 months or 6 months after the war started. And then the Allies had to evacuate Gallipoli in early 1916.
Just before you go on the
Yes.
timeline, the Somme, when did the Somme start?
The Somme started after. The Somme started, I think it was the summer of 1916.
Okay, because at that time, the Newfoundland regiments virtually wiped out at Beaumont and Allen. So
The Newfoundland Regiment, yes, you're right, was sent to the Western Front later. You're right,
okay,
yes.
right.
So I'll just say a few quick words about Turkey's Turkey, the Ottoman Empire. Turkey had been going through a lot of. Turkey had been under the Sultan had been a sort of an autocracy, a more traditional state, more authoritarian state. Now in the late 19th century, there had been attempts to reform the Ottoman Empire and turn it into a constitutional monarchy with a more modern military and more modern economic conditions. In 1908, there was a revolt by young army officers, the Young Turks, who took over the government and tried to modernize Turkey further in terms of economic reforms, constitutional reforms. So the Young Turks were a leading force within the government in 1914. Essentially younger army officers who were trying to modernize the Turkish state. And they actually, many of their leaders felt closer to Germany. They saw Germany as a bit of a model. Germany at the time had a sort of semi-constitutional state with the Kaiser, and there was a Reichstag, there was a parliament, but power was divided. The Reichstag was not very powerful in terms of executive authority. So anyhow, Turkey had been drawing closer to Germany. Germany had provided military aid, military training to the Turkish army. One of the great German projects at the time was to build a railway to Baghdad, that would cross Turkey and go into Baghdad. So that was sort of a German project. So Turkey in September, October of 1914 ended up making the decision to join the Central Powers. So we can see here. This is we can see here in the green is the Ottoman Empire at the time, and in purple is British, and French is orange. The British Empire was of course much larger, but in the Middle East, those were the main British possessions at the time. And yes, green is the Ottoman Empire. Anybody remember the movie that made actor Peter O'Toole famous? Exactly. So in Arabia, in the Arabian Peninsula, Lawrence of Arabia, T.E. Lawrence, was fighting during World War I. He fought the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman army. I don't know the details of his work, but he allied with certain local tribes and sort of represented the British interests there, fighting the Ottomans in the Arabian Peninsula. But again, the Gallipoli campaign, you can see where where Istanbul is, or also called Constantinople. The Gallipoli campaign will take place in that area, in that corner.
Excuse me, the
Yes.
green line, the limits of the Ottoman Empire. Now, was they pushed back by the French and the Brits to that area? You see the line?
Yes.
What does that line represent?
The green. Good question. The green line is the borders of the Ottoman Empire around the year 1800. So 100 years prior. So we can see how, yes, the Ottoman Empire had been shrinking throughout the 19th century. The Ottoman Empire lost territory to the Russians, lost territory to the British, lost territory to the Italians. The Italians conquered Libya in 1911, 1912. So that was one of the reasons that the Young Turks had been trying to modernize the Turkish state and the Turkish army, because they felt embarrassed that Turkey was not able to stand up to the other powers in Europe. Just quickly, I'll review some of the overall participation of France and Canada in World War I. Of course, France and Canada were in World War I from the very get-go. When Britain entered the war, Canada automatically entered the war with Britain. It's interesting, in World War I, when Britain entered the war, Canada automatically followed suit. But in World War II, when Britain declared war on Germany, Canada took, I think, about 1 week to declare war on Germany. So between World War I and World War II, we see an evolution of Canada's greater independence in foreign affairs. Right? But as we know, yes, World War I was a critical event for Canada, and Canadian nationhood in many ways developed from some of the main events, the Battle of Passchendaele and all these. Yes, Vimy Ridge, yes. So Canada sent over, yes, a large contingent to fight in Europe, and as we know, yes, thousands of Canadians died there. France was one of the great powers in Europe, and again was in the war from the very beginning. The war on the Western Front took place on big parts of French soil in northeastern France and eastern France. So many parts of France were under German occupation during a big part of World War I. And France lost, I think it was over 1.5 million dead, out of a population of about 40 million at the time. So it was a truly traumatic event for France. Anyway, I'll say, before moving on, I'll just say something quickly about France and the Middle East. France was a great colonial power at the time, because France, after the Russian Empire and the British Empire, the French Empire was the largest one from territory-wise. France had controlled colonies in Africa, Central Africa, of course, also even places like Vietnam, and Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, French Indochina, and even Madagascar. And also in the Middle East, France had a lot of economic involvement in parts of the Middle East. So there was a French, so France had a strong economic, political, strategic interest in the Middle East, because France controlled Algeria at the time, and France, yes, was, of course, France was allied to Russia, right? Russia and France were allies, so France also had an interest in what Russia would be doing in the Middle East and with regards to the Ottoman Empire. Anybody seen the Mel Gibson movie Gallipoli? I think it was in 1981. Yeah. So that was a famous movie about this campaign. The Gallipoli campaign was launched by mainly France and Britain. So France and Britain were the leaders of this campaign, and they started so they basically sent their ships and they sent their troops into Turkey to fight Turkey. And then the question is, why did they do that? So they did it for various reasons, but essentially at the time, in the Western Front, and to some degree also in the Eastern Front, there was no movement. Right? The front lines were more or less stable with all these trenches, and there was, and in spite of that, there were tremendous casualty rates. So thousands of soldiers would die just to take over a small piece of, to take over a small piece of land. So movement was very difficult in the Western Front, and also to some degree in the Eastern Front. And there were very high casualty rates. So all countries are losing many soldiers, but without being able to defeat the enemy, or without being able to change the dynamic of the situation in Europe. So British leaders, for example, Winston Churchill, were trying to think of ways to break the deadlock. Right? What can we do to defeat Germany? It seems impossible in the Western Front to achieve some kind of breakthrough or change in the dynamic. There's a static situation. Now Churchill and others in the British government thought that we have the British Navy, which is the most powerful navy, and we're not really using all of it against Germany. We're trying to use some of the British ships to keep the German Navy bottled up in the, in the North Sea and the Baltic. But what can we do to, could we use the Navy to achieve some kind of change in the dynamic of the war? Right. So that was one of the reasons. They're trying to look for ways to do something different, right? Take, in Europe, there's, the situation is deadlocked. No country, no country is able to defeat the other. Although there's a lot of fighting going on, but they're trying to think of ways to change that dynamic. There were other reasons for trying this campaign in Gallipoli. For example, Britain and France thought that it might put, if you defeat Turkey, or if you occupy Turkey's capital, they were hoping to also bring in other countries in the Balkans to the side of the Allies. For example, Bulgaria, for example, Greece, or Romania. Right? So Britain and France were hoping that by defeating Turkey, these other smaller countries in Southeast Europe might decide to join the Allies, the winning side, right? Hopefully for them. Another reason for this campaign was that by conquering Constantinople, they thought that it might allow Britain and France to send more supplies to Russia, because Russia was suffering a lot and didn't have a lot of, a lot of ammunition or a lot of as many supplies as it needed. So they hoped that by going through Constantinople, it might be possible for Britain and France to provide supplies to Russia. And it might also enable Russia to start exporting again. Because at that time, Turkey, Russia had no port or outlet into the sea, other than through the north, which freezes over a lot. So through the Black Sea, that was Russia's main sea lane for exports. So Russia could. But of course, when Turkey entered the war, it was blocked. So Russia could not export anymore. These were some of the reasons for the Allies to try this campaign. Another reason was that they hoped that by conquering or by controlling southeastern Europe, it might be possible to isolate Germany by maybe knocking Turkey out of the war and perhaps somehow defeating Austria-Hungary in the Balkans. So that would, it might eliminate one or two of Germany's main allies. So essentially, yes, because by the end of 1914, everything in Europe the situation in Europe is basically static. So the leaders of Britain and France are trying to think of ways. What can we do to change the dynamic of the situation? So a couple of maps here on the left. Again, we can see Turkey or the Ottoman Empire, Constantinople, Greece. So this is Southeast Europe, and we can see the Gallipoli Peninsula, and so one of the hopes is that yes, they could provide supplies to Russia. Now this on the right, it's just a sort of closer view of that Gallipoli Peninsula, but we can see how the Allied forces have to land, have to control that. The two sides, because you see, Turkey has the European side and the Asian side, right? And you have to go between them to get to Constantinople. And we can see Anzac is the Australian, New Zealand forces fighting under British command, and also we can also see the French.
Just change that from 10 minutes to 1 hour, then you'll have no problem. that thing's popping.
Oh, I see. Yes, thanks. Yeah. So these are maps that sort of show what where they actually had to land. Right? Now, of course, what would you imagine would be the main difficulty in an operation like this?
Well, because it's narrow.
It's narrow, yes.
And so I just don't know why the British would go put their navy in that little strip, you know, instead of they could have gone from other places. But anyway, that's.
So, what are some of? Yes, good. Okay, fair enough.
Well, apparently they totally underestimated the quality of the Turkish defenses. It seems that all along this stretch of water there, Turkey had built fortifications.
Yes.
And with heavy armaments, helped by the Germans. They had German advisors.
Yes. So.
Trained there.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah.
Enemies on both sides.
Exactly. Yeah, you have the Turks waiting for you on both sides. And not only that, but the Turks would actually put mines in the water through that narrow passage. So your ships trying to go through are, you know, they could easily get blown up, right? And there's forts on either side. So the Turks can be shooting down at your ships, right, from their forts.
It's probably the most stupid war was that taking pretty.
Initially, initially the British and the French, they tried to use only ships. So they first tried to only send in ships without an army, right? Without a real army. So they hoped that the ships might be able to get through and then somehow reach Constantinople and maybe somehow perhaps force Constantinople to surrender, or if under pressure from the ships. Now, within a couple of months, they realized that they needed an actual army to land on the two sides of the Dardanelles, right? So that they would need an army. They would need soldiers to destroy the forts and take control of the territory, so that the ships could pass through. Right? So basically, yeah, the British, the Australians, French, they landed on different spots along those. But again, there's Turks waiting, right, on both sides as well, trying to shoot at them and basically push them back into the sea, force them back out. So the Allies were able to land, right, were able to land as soldiers on both sides. But eventually they occupied some small strips of territory, beachheads, but they were never really able to go further than that. They were never able to defeat the Turks, the Turkish army that was putting pressure on them from more inland. Right? They stayed there, yes, for a few months, but eventually they decided to evacuate. They decided to pull out because the losses were getting too high, and they were not achieving. They were not being able to take control of the straits, the Dardanelles Straits. In terms of on the Turkish side. Yes, I mentioned that the Turks were forewarned, and so the Turkish army was waiting for the Allies. So as soon as the Allies land in some of those places, in Suvla Bay, for example, wherever they land, there's the Turkish army is waiting for them nearby.
Because there are cliffsides.
Exactly. Yes.
It's not like a long beach and flat country. It's mountains.
Yes. And so the Turks, the Turkish army was always putting pressure on the Allies, trying to prevent the Allies from taking more territory in Turkey. The Germans provided supplies. Even the Austro-Hungarians provided some supplies. Now there were some German military advisors, but not as far as I know, not a large number of German soldiers. However, the top general of the Turkish army in that area was German, Liman von Sanders. So the Turks had their army in the Gallipoli campaign had a German commander-in-chief. Also, in terms of, just a quick word in terms of operation, I mean, there were even submarines operating, right? And I also mentioned that there were, yes, many minefields in the water, or many mines in the water. All right, so it's 7:10, so I'll just go on for another 10 or 15 minutes. But I'll just mention, yes, France sent a corps expéditionnaire d'Orient, so it was an army composed of the French Foreign Legion, French Army, even Algerian and Senegalese soldiers, which were all part of the French Empire at the time. France, now the statistics for the number of casualties vary. So for the Gallipoli campaign, not only are there arguments among historians about the merits of the campaign, was it good or bad, was it a good idea or a bad idea, but there doesn't even seem to be agreement about the number of soldiers that participated or the number of soldiers that died. But France, according to some numbers, lost around 7,000 to 8,000 dead soldiers in the Gallipoli campaign. And a total of approximately, the numbers are, some of the numbers I've seen is that a total of about 80,000 French soldiers participated. At 40,000 French soldiers were there at the time of the height of the French, the greatest French involvement. So about 40,000 were in the Gallipoli campaign, and about 8,000 perished in the campaign. Yeah. So France actually had a big involvement, although Gallipoli is remembered mainly for what Australians and New Zealanders did, but France had a big involvement too, but not as well known perhaps. Yes?
I'm pretty sure I read somewhere, and I can't find it again, that when the British decided to go on this adventure, and they were looking for troops to send there, and then they resorted in particular to the Australian and the New Zealanders, and they knew that these people had not been trained enough, and they didn't have the equipment, but they thought that the Turkish soldiers would be so poor that they could be wiped out even with troops that were not really battle-hardened or whatever. So they were really sort of sent to
that's an interesting point. My understanding is that the Gallipoli campaign, in many ways, was for Australia what Vimy Ridge and Passchendaele were for Canada. For them, it was the sacrifice of their soldiers was one of the things that really developed and heightened their sense of nationhood, independent nationhood. So in terms of Canada, yes, I mentioned there was a Newfoundland regiment, about so approximately 1,000 soldiers that were sent there as part of the fighting under the British Army, so they had this regiment had been assembled near St. John's, apparently I was reading how a section of their sort of pants. The British soldiers normally had the khaki color, like a brown color for the lower part of their uniform, but there was not apparently in St. John's at the time there was not enough of that material, so they had sort of like blue socks. Yep. So, so the Newfoundland regiment participated in the Gallipoli campaign, and when the campaign was over, yes, as you mentioned, they were sent over to fight in the Western Front in France. So yes, some pictures of the Newfoundland regiment, so that you can see they're practicing in their tents, practicing with bayonets.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Just send me the bill.
All right, so I'm going to finish by talking a little bit about assessing the strategic impact of the campaign and what were the political consequences of the campaign. In terms of the strategic impact of the campaign, it's of course it's hard to say, but ideally the British leaders, if the operation had succeeded, would have used that their control of that area of Europe and Asia Minor to revolutionize the dynamics of the war. Maybe help Russia, and maybe and make sure that smaller countries would join the Allies, the Triple Entente. Maybe even weaken Austria-Hungary. But none of that really happened. Now, in terms of a strategic, not in the short term, in terms of a strategic impact, the thing is the Allies, Britain and France, have used almost 500,000 soldiers in this campaign, in addition to ships and their navies. So of course, that means that those are resources that they could not use in Europe, in the Western Front. So the strategic impact was, well, it was not what they had hoped for. Right? They did not achieve their strategic goals. In terms of the political consequences, it basically meant that Turkey would continue fighting with Germany, and it meant that countries like, for example, in early 1915, Bulgaria was wavering. They could not decide, should we stay neutral, should we join the Central Powers, or maybe join the Allies. But Bulgaria decided to join the Central Powers, and when they saw that it seemed like Germany and Austria-Hungary were doing well in the war. So the political consequences were that the status quo remained in that part of Europe, and smaller countries, and there wasn't really a change in the dynamics in the Balkans, or not what the British and French would have hoped for. Of course, at a more government political level in Britain, the British viewed Gallipoli as a disaster, military disaster. So Churchill had to resign, and it was the poor results of the campaign were one of the reasons that Herbert Asquith, the British Prime Minister at the time, would later on have to also resign, because his leadership was weakened because of how this campaign turned out. So those are some of the political consequences. Now, Gallipoli, of course, ended in January of 1916, but World War I continued on for almost another 3 years, until November of 1918. So the World War I continued mainly as still they still had the Western and Eastern fronts, but there was the Ottoman Empire still was fighting the British in Palestine, in Syria, in Arabia, and it's interesting that the Ottoman Empire was also fighting Russia in the Caucasus, in that area, in the sort of further up north. And of course, what happened in February 1917 in
Bolshevik Revolution,
Russian Revolution? So, so the Russian Empire collapsed, and now one of the questions people ask is, if the Gallipoli campaign had succeeded, would the Russian Revolution have been prevented? Because the performance of the Russian Empire would have improved. So that's one of the sort of questions that are left out there.
Yeah, you know the Germans actually facilitated the return of Lenin in Russia.
Yes.
Because they knew that if you went there, then it would help the collapse of
Yes, that's true.
It's true. Because the Bolshevik Revolution came like a gold mine for Turkey.
All right, so it's 7:20, and just the final. This is the final slide, and I just thought I'd try to discuss some of my personal thoughts on the campaign and the context. So one of the questions is, was Gallipoli, was it a brilliant strategic concept? Was the idea at least a good idea?
No.
For what I read, it was the rewards.
No, it's not a good idea because it's amazing, like the British, if you go to England, you ask the British, how did you guys conquer the world? They have one word for it, our navy, they say. Because they had the best navy, you know. Any country has the ocean front, literally British conquered it. But how they make this stupid decision here is just still, I study lots of this, still is mind-boggling. You know, why would you go put your navy into this narrow strip? You know, it's just, probably was the worst idea.
Well, I think there's obviously many perspectives on this. Historians have been ever since the British government, after the campaign ended, they actually published 2 official reports, 1917 and 1918, and ever since then there's been a number of books. People saying it was a good idea, people saying it was a bad idea, people saying it should have been done differently, people saying it almost succeeded. And the debate continues today. So there's no wrong, or, I mean, as far as we know, there's not one right or wrong perspective. No, I will offer, I would like to share a bit of my thoughts on that, my personal thoughts. And these are just my thoughts. You know, it's just my own personal impressions. And I'm not saying that I'm, I don't think I'm necessarily right. But just my own thoughts is that at a very high level, at the level of what we might call global strategy or conceptual strategy, I think it was a good idea. It was a good idea to at least try to find a way to change the dynamic of what was happening in the main fronts. And because Britain, as you said, had the most powerful navy, they were right in trying to think of new ways to use that navy to change the overall war situation, to try to find a weak point of the Central Powers. Obviously, Germany was not really a weak point because no matter how hard the British and the French were trying in the Western Front, they couldn't break the German army. And of course, the Russians were losing to the German army at the time in the Eastern Front. So my personal sense is that Churchill and other leaders were their general instinct or their general thought was correct in trying to think, we have this powerful tool, the British Navy. How can we use it to find a weak spot in the Central Powers? And so they decided that the Ottoman Empire, Turkey, was probably one of the weak spots, and that you could try to use the Navy to probe that and to find a way to... Their idea was that if they could maybe knock Turkey out of the war, then you help Russia, you threaten or weaken Austria-Hungary, you persuade other countries to join you, you change the very... the static situation that you have up till that point. So my guess is that they were right in at least trying in the overall instinct or the overall proposal of trying to find a weak spot using the British Navy, trying to change the situation in Europe. I think that was probably wise. Now, where they were not as wise or where they were not as competent was at the lower level of what we might call battlefield strategy and operations and tactics. So from the point of view of planning, the planning was very poor. Right? So for example, they didn't realize that they didn't know what what the Turkish army would do, or they didn't know how strong the Turkish forts and ammunition or supplies would be in that area. So they didn't know about all the minefields. They didn't have a clear idea of how British ships would overcome Turkish resistance. And I think also it seems from documents available that British leaders also didn't really have a clear idea of what they would do if they reached Constantinople. Do you try to occupy Constantinople? Do you try to occupy the whole of Turkey? So they didn't think that out properly either. Yes.
Well, it seems also that, as you said, it was Churchill with probably more of a political mind that was on this subject, and it seems there was some disconnect between him and his staff of high naval officers who were not that convinced that it was a good idea. They didn't get along together because Churchill was trying to really push and do things and sort of shortcut his staff. And from what I've read, it seems that even gathering the ships, deciding to put them together, when to send them, it doesn't look like something really clearly defined with orders, dates, and whatever. And then suddenly they decided to send men on the ground. And there again, it seems that they didn't wait until the ships at first retreated.
Yeah. So, and yes, those are good points, I think. And also, even at a political level, there was a lot of confusion in the sense that, for example, Russia wanted to. Some of Russian leaders wanted to control Constantinople because that gives them control of that export lane for their exporting their goods. But even Greece had interests, for example, in that area. And of course Britain and France too. So even the Allies among themselves didn't have a very clear idea of what they were going to do if they ended up controlling that region. So I think, yeah, in this campaign, but also in any organization, in any government, in any business, you need to have a clear coordination between strategy and operations. So if you have a certain strategy is how you're going to achieve your basic goals. So you need to be clear on that. And once you have decided that, you need to make sure that your operations and your tactics match the strategy and are well suited to accomplishing and carrying out that strategy. So in this case, it seems like the planning, first of all, the strategy and the tactics were not well planned out, well thought out.
I was wondering, was any thought at the time given to having Russia attack Turkey on the northern part of Turkey?
Good question. Yes, and in fact, the British and the French requested Russian troops. Hey, can you send Russians? Can the Russians join our attack on the? But Russia in the end could not spare troops.
Russia sent, because I know I'm Armenian, because Russia came and helped Armenians, half of Western Armenia, they conquered it. But what happened was the nightmare was the Bolshevik Revolution, and so Russia just put all their troops, went back, And that's where the Russians, the Germans were, in every Turkish division there was one German officer. And so they put together 100,000 soldiers, the Turks, and they sent them against the Russians. And the Russians didn't fight. It was Caucasus, mountains was cold. They were all 75%, they just froze to death. So yeah, Russia was there halfway, but it's just Bolshevik Revolution was the nightmare.
You're right, you're right that Russia was fighting Turkey in the Caucasus, but Russia. So you're right there. Now Russia was not able to send soldiers to the Dardanelles, to the Gallipoli campaign, but they did. But the British and the French did envision a Russian role. But again, there was also political complications because the Russians. The British and the French knew that the Russians would have wanted to, may have wanted to keep Constantinople for themselves after the war. In fact, during the war, the British, the French, and the Russians were were even before the war ended, they were signing treaties among themselves saying this is how we'll carve up or divide up the Ottoman Empire after the war ends, even before they had even won the war. Yes.
Also, could it be that the British didn't really have very good intelligence? Obviously, the Germans.
Well, that's for sure.
They didn't have, I think you're right, they didn't have proper intelligence on the strength of the Turkish army in that area and its dispositions. Yeah, where was it located? Where were the minefields? How, for example, the British, or some British leaders thought that their ships, firing alone from the ships would be enough to destroy Turkish forts on the shore, near the shore. But no, the forts were either too strong or sometimes even too high up that the British guns from their ships would not be able to shoot at a high enough angle to reach the forts. So these are small operational details that obviously, when they all add up together, they make it difficult. Make the odds very long to actually successfully completing the campaign. And again, the campaign's objectives also, even at a political level, were not always that clear, right? Do we conquer Constantinople? Do we try to do more? Do we try to conquer more of Turkey, even if we get through to Constantinople? So there was a lack of planning and preparation at the tactical level, lack of clarity at the sort of battlefield strategy level. But again, I think my sense is that the overall instinct or intuition that Churchill had of trying to find a way to change the dynamic of the war, my guess is that he was right on that. And that if the planning had been better, if there had been more maybe commitment, more coordination among the Army and the Navy, maybe something else might have been achieved. Now, the British and the French, of course, they always had, and this is going to be my last comment, the British and the French always had this dilemma or choice. If we send soldiers to other parts of the world, like Turkey, what does that mean? That means we weaken our armies in France, which might give the Germans a chance to break through and conquer Paris and finish the war before we even do anything in Turkey. Right? So that's the dilemma, right? So some British leaders were saying, no, if we try to attack Turkey, the Germans are just going to come down, conquer Paris, and that'll be it. Right? It will be pointless to do anything elsewhere. But Churchill and others said that if you just try to stay where you are right now, you're not achieving anything, and you're losing thousands of men every week. So might as well try to do something to change the dynamic of the situation, right? But there's that dilemma. If you send more soldiers to Gallipoli, you weaken the defense of Paris, right?
But were the Anzacs, in fact, just starting out in the war, or had they been on the Western Front at that point?
Good question. I don't know. As far as I know, this was one of their main contributions to the war. And I think Australians also fought in the Middle East and in Africa. Yes.
Palestine.
But yes, the Gallipoli campaign started in around February 1915. So yeah, before that, I think it was the first significant contribution by the Australians. Yeah. Yes.
Was air power a factor at all, if any, was used during that campaign?
I'm not that I'm aware of. There may have been small use of planes for reconnaissance, but not for bombing or at that time there was just not big enough, not yet highly developed. Yeah.
So were the Anzacs coming up through the Red Sea?
Yes, through the Suez Canal, correct. And the Anzacs for example, they would be based in Egypt, and then they would be sent to Gallipoli. And the wounded would come back to Egypt or to Greece, right, for treatment. Yeah, but through the Suez Canal, correct.
Do you know when the British took over Egypt?
The British took over Egypt around 1880, 1885. Yes, yeah, that's when they took over Egypt.
So they took it from Turkish Empire, the Ottoman Empire?
Well, at the beginning, it was sort of a, there were some internal disturbances, and so Britain took control of Egypt. Initially, it was officially still under Ottoman sovereignty, officially, but then eventually it became formally a part of the British Empire.
But the French were there, sure, in Napoleon, 18...
Yes, that's true.
Oh,
Yes.
1800.
Yeah. So the French were not in 1880. The French were not happy when Britain took full control of Egypt. Yeah, because the French also had large investments in the Suez. Well, the Suez Canal was started by French firm, but eventually the British took it over.
Also in Alexandria, the French were quite influential.
Yes. Yes.
I think that they are very complicated relation, France and England, Middle East, and they tried, I think, in 1916 to solve it.
Yes.
With
Sykes-Picot, yes. So they divided up the Ottoman Empire.
That was the Treaty of Seville, and then the Ottoman told the British, hey, you let us stay here, you could have the whole Middle East. So the Anglo Petroleum was happy with it, so that's ended up everything. So now the British, they went and conquered the Middle East.
Any other?
I should think one of the main significances was the effect on Churchill in that when it came to World War II and what we've just gone through in the French Normandy invasion, combined operations had brought the Army and the Navy and the Air Force together to work together to bring this thing off, which was amazing.
Yes.
And yet there's a lot of doubt in Churchill's mind, I believe, in June of 6th of June.
He was worried that it would not work out.
Succeed, but I suspect that because of his experience here, he was able to bring things together.
Mm-hmm. Yes, this is my understanding is that this campaign is still studied in military academies today, in terms of how not to carry out a combined Army-Navy operation. Yeah.